The words told her she had been accepted into the program everyone in her family had talked about since she was a little girl. She sat down slowly and placed the paper on the table, noticing her hands were steady and her chest felt strangely quiet. What should have been one of the happiest moments of her life arrived wrapped in a fog of duty instead of desire. The question that formed in that silence was not about the program itself, but about something harder to name. Why did a goal everyone admired feel so hollow the moment it became real? Over the following weeks, she continued the motions, telling friends and receiving congratulations that only deepened the quiet confusion inside her. Most people would say this goal was clearly meaningful because it promised respect, security, and the approval of people she loved. That explanation made sense until she realized she already had respect, security, and love before the letter arrived. The goal had never been about a missing piece in her life, but about a story she had learned to tell about who she was supposed to become. She began to notice that the heaviness was not exhaustion from work, but a particular kind of distance from herself every time she thought about the years ahead. If goals are supposed to energize and direct us, this one seemed to be quietly draining her even before it had truly begun. That reversal opens a deeper psychological puzzle. What makes a goal feel personally meaningful rather than merely certified as important by everyone else? It is tempting to imagine that meaningful goals are simply the ones that match our talents or align with our interests in an obvious way. But she was good at the required skills and had shown genuine curiosity about the field when she was younger, which made the emptiness even more confusing. Common advice is to follow your passion, yet many people feel the same hollowness she felt, even when working on things they once loved. Psychologists describe this distinction through something called self-determination theory, which helps explain why the same goal can feel alive or dead, depending on how it connects to the person chasing it. Self-determination means that people thrive when three basic needs are fed, not with food or water, but with experiences that sustain the feeling of being a self. The first need is autonomy, which does not mean doing everything alone or without help, but rather the sense that your actions come from a place of genuine choice. Autonomy is the quiet feeling of being the one who steers. Even if you are following a map someone else helped you read. The second need is competence, which is the feeling that you can learn, improve, and have an effect on the world around you rather than being helpless or permanently stuck. The third need is relatedness, the deep and ordinary sense of feeling connected to other people in ways where you matter and they matter to you. When a goal feeds these needs, it tends to feel like an expression of who you are, but when it starves them, it can start to feel like a costume you wear every morning. Our woman had plenty of relatedness, and her competence was still growing, but autonomy was the quiet casualty she had never learned to name. She had chosen the goal freely in the sense that nobody forced her hand, but the voice inside that whispered, "This is what a good daughter does," had been speaking long enough to sound like her own. Researchers call this process introjection, where an expectation from outside becomes an internal rule that chases approval or avoids guilt without ever truly feeling like a free choice. Introjected goals often feel urgent and heavy because the reward is not the activity itself, but the relief of not disappointing someone you love, or the comfort of staying inside a role that kept you safe as a child. By contrast, identified goals are those where a person recognizes the value behind an activity and genuinely endorses it as their own, even if the original suggestion came from someone else. An identified goal might begin with a parent saying music is important, but the child eventually feels the value of music inside themselves and practices because it matters to them, not just to earn a smile. When she looked honestly at her long pursuit, She saw that the goal had stayed mostly introjected, wrapped around a fear of letting other people down and a story about the kind of success that proves you are good enough. The first obvious answer was that she had simply picked the wrong goal. But the deeper truth was that the same activities might have felt entirely different if the underlying motivation had grown from obligation toward ownership. That changes the question entirely. Meaning does not live only in the destination, but in the quality of the reasons we carry while walking toward it. To understand how a reason changes the weight of a goal, researchers have tracked people pursuing important personal projects over months and years. The findings show a pattern that is both simple and quietly radical. People who pursue self-concordant goals invest more sustained effort and report greater well-being when they make progress. Self-concordant goals are the ones where your answer to why you are doing this pulls from values you would stand behind, even if no one was watching. The mechanism is not magical, but psychological. When a goal connects to what you genuinely care about, setbacks feel like obstacles to a valued outcome rather than evidence that you are not enough. However, when a goal is carried mostly by introjected motivation, every stumble can become a trial over your worth as a person, and every success can feel like temporarily passing an exam you never wanted to take. The woman began to see that her hollow response to the acceptance letter was not a sign that she lacked grit, but that her motivation had been borrowing energy from the wrong source for years. She was not lazy, and she was not broken. She was tired from carrying a goal that had never fully become her own. This does not mean that every goal suggested by a parent or a culture is doomed to feel empty, because external encouragement can spark internal discovery when it meets genuine curiosity. The difference is whether the goal eventually finds a root inside the person or stays planted only in the social world outside, dependent on applause for survival. A child who tries piano because a grandparent asks may discover a love for music that feels deeply personal, but another child's, in the same lesson, may simply learn to perform gratitude without ever feeling the music as their own. The same activity, the same instructor, and the same weekly practice can feed two completely different internal experiences, one of ownership and one of quiet compliance. That is why simply looking at the label of goal, such as doctor, writer, parent, or leader, reveals almost nothing about whether it will feel meaningful to the person doing it. Meaningfulness is not a property of the goal title, but of the relation between the goal and the self that pursues it. When our woman replayed her childhood arguments for this career, she could hear the echo of grown-up pride and the fear of being ordinary, not the sound of her own wondering voice, asking what would I care about even if no one celebrated me. Research on adolescence and emerging adulthood shows that this is a vulnerable period when internal pressures can easily dress themselves as personal dreams, because the self is still forming and the need to belong runs deep. The voices of parents, communities, and peers can become so thoroughly mixed with our own that separating them takes a kind of attention most people are never taught to give. The hollow feeling she felt was not a failure of the goal, but a signal from a part of her mind that recognized the weight was borrowed from someone else's blueprint. To see this more clearly, imagine two people training for the same marathon. One running because the challenge feels like an adventure that stretches her body and spirit. The other running because she fears being seen as quitter if she stops. Neither runner is wrong or weak, but the quality of meaning they experience is shaped far more by the story underneath the action than by the medal around the neck. This is not merely a mood difference, but a measurable psychological reality. Studies using daily diary methods find that time spent on autonomously motivated activities is associated with greater vitality and lower emotional exhaustion. Vitality is the feeling of being alive and energized rather than drained. And it acts like a psychological compass pointing toward the activities that genuinely feed the self. When vitality disappears consistently around a goal, it is worth asking whether the goal is being run on fuel that was never designed to sustain a long journey. Yet acknowledging this does not give anyone an easy escape from responsibility, because the answer is rarely to abandon every hard thing the moment it feels heavy. Many deeply meaningful goals, from raising a child to building a skill, include seasons of exhaustion, boredom, and doubt that do not automatically mean the motivation is false. The critical cue is whether the pattern across time feels like chosen effort given towards something you care about, or trapped effort demanded by a story you cannot question. That distinction returns us to our opening image with a sharper question. What message was hidden inside the silence after the letter arrived? The silence was not empty. It was the sound of a motivation system finally running out of the social rewards that had powered it for years. She had been praised as a serious student, praised as a responsible daughter, and praised as a promising future professional. But she had never felt the quiet humming of "this is mine" that makes hard work feel like an investment in something personal. When the letter replaced the possibility with certainty, the applause that used to push her forward suddenly had nothing more to promise, and she was left alone with a goal that had never learned to speak in her own voice. That is the moment when the conflict between introjection and genuine personal meaning becomes impossible to ignore. Introjected goals often survive on anticipation of approval or fear of disappointment. But arriving at the destination removes the imagined audience and forces the question, now that I have it, do I even want it? The answer she felt was not a clear no, but a terrifying silence where excitement was supposed to be. And that terror is a perfectly understandable response to discovering that a major life path was built on motivations she had never examined. The psychological task is not to erase the past, but to begin listening to the internal signals that distinguish between goals that feel like cages and goals that feel like homes. One practical way to strengthen that listening is to ask a deceptively simple question about each important goal. Why am I doing this, and whose voice is answering? If the first answers circle around avoiding guilt, gaining approval, or proving worth, the next step is not to abandon the goal immediately, but to explore whether other reasons could grow alongside or eventually replace them. Sometimes a goal started for pressured reasons can transform as a person finds aspects of the activity that genuinely express their values. But that transformation requires first admitting that the original fuel was borrowed. Either path begins with the uncomfortable but freeing recognition that meaningfulness is not a guarantee hidden inside a prestigious title, but a quality that emerges when action and authentic self touch each other. That brings us to the central reversal of our story, the insight that changes how we should hear the silence that followed the letter. The silence was not a sign that she lacked ambition or that she was ungrateful for her opportunities. The silence was the first moment in a long time that nobody else was speaking inside her mind. And in that quiet, she could finally hear the absence of her own yes. A goal becomes personally meaningful not when it impresses the world, but when it aligns with what you would still care about if there were no stage, no audience, and no price to pay for disappointing anyone. The mind registers that alignment not as a loud declaration, but as a subtle sense of fit, a feeling that the work ahead is demanding but not draining, difficult but not deadening. Research on this phenomenon shows that people who regularly examine their reasons for pursuing goals and shift toward more autonomous motivations report not only greater well-being, but also more persistence and creative thinking. The effect is not instant, and it is not magic. but it is reliable enough that psychological interventions designed to help people connect goals to their deeper values have shown measurable benefits in classrooms, workplaces, and health settings. This does not mean that every socially valued goal must be rejected, or that parents and mentors should stop encouraging young people toward challenging paths. It means that the most powerful encouragement helps a person discover the value inside the goal, rather than simply inheriting the expectation. The difference between a pushed piano student who feels owned by the bench and an engaged one who voluntarily returns to the keys is often just that small internal shift from "I have to do this" to "I see why this matters to me." That shift is the psychological engine beneath personal meaning, a realignment of motivation from external demand to internal endorsement. Now return one more time to the woman at the table, the letter still resting on the wood, the quiet still hanging in the air. What she could not see then, and what we can see now, is that the hollow feeling was not a verdict on her worth, but a remarkably precise piece of data about the kind of motivation that had carried her that far. Her body and mind were sending a signal that is easy to misread as depression or burnout when it is actually a form of emotional honesty. The signal said this course of action was designed for someone else's idea of a good life, and the silence that followed the applause was the first space she had ever had to ask what her own idea might sound like. That question does not require a dramatic overhaul overnight, because reclaiming meaningfulness is rarely about a single brave announcement, but about countless small choices that close the gap between what you do and what you truly endorse. It might mean finding a corner of the same field that connects to a deeper curiosity, or it might mean gradually building a side project that feeds autonomy while continuing to honor existing commitments. There is no single correct path, but there is one reliable starting point. Start noticing the moments when you feel most alive and most drained, and treat both as information rather than random noise. Moments of vitality often cluster around activities where all three needs, autonomy, competence, and relatedness, are being met without constant self-criticism. Moments of deadness often cluster around activities where those needs are starved, particularly autonomy, which cannot be replaced by praise or external success. When the woman finally began this slow inventory, she did not immediately quit everything. But she did start paying attention to the difference between working toward tomorrow out of fear and leaning into the next hour out of genuine interest. Over time, that attention changed how she selected small daily goals, which in turn shifted the larger direction of her life without requiring her to burn every bridge behind her. The letter did not become a symbol of failure, but a marker of the day. She finally noticed that a meaningful life is not the one that looks best on paper, but the one that feels most like your own from the inside. That insight reaches beyond any single career choice or family expectation. It touches the quiet architecture of motivation that operates under every goal we set. You can chase a goal for 1,000 reasons, but the ones that will sustain you when the path gets dark are those that grew roots in the soil of what you genuinely care about. The most deeply meaningful goals are not always the most impressive, but they are the ones you would still tend even if the audience went home and the stage disappeared. And the next time you find yourself holding an achievement that should feel joyful, but instead feels silent, you might recognize that silence as your own voice clearing its throat, preparing to speak at last.